Sanguine, so hungry. Amidst his trance-like words, Jack raised his head and looked at Joshua, who was wearing a pair of scarlet-red gloves. So hungry. His mouth opened in an instant, reaching straight to his ears, revealing his neat white teeth and thick saliva that was constantly gushing out of his mouth. At the same time, he threw himself forward towards Joshua. He was so fast that he left behind an afterimage on the ground. Although Joshua was on high alert, he wasn't able to react in time. Before he could even make out what was happening, the little boy Jack had already pounced in front of him. Thump! The yellow-haired figure seemed to slam into an invisible wall, stopping only a step away from Joshua. Jack suspended himself in midair as a reddish glow from the darkness emerged from his body and started to corrode the transparent barrier that was denying him entry. Behind Joshua and Derek, demon hunter Colin had already fallen to one knee at some point. He had stabbed his sword, smeared with a silver ointment, into the ground. Soon after, the area around the altar instantly brightened, as if it was the purest ray of the light of dawn. Colin suddenly drew his sword, and his figure strangely split apart, turning into a series of afterimages that spread out around the altar. Every single figure raised the sword in their hands at the same time, and combined with the light of dawn in the vicinity, released a bright glow. Su, su, su. One sword after another was thrust forward as the light of dawn converged towards Jack from all directions, encircling him in the middle. Under the brilliance of the rising sun, the black and red figures quickly evaporated, disappearing under the storm-like barrage of attacks. In the underground hall where the altar was located, the brilliance became abnormally bright, so bright that Derek Berg couldn't help but close his eyes. With a sudden jolt, he suddenly woke up from his slumber and saw a bonfire quietly burning in front of him and his teammates, who were diligently guarding the camp. Demon hunter Colin, who was sitting cross-legged beside a stone pillar, opened his eyes and said in a deep voice, "We will set off after 50 rounds of lightning." Upon hearing this, Derek looked up at the sky and found that the frequency of lightning hadn't significantly increased. Darkness remained the ruler of this land. When he thought of the city he was about to arrive at and the temple of the fallen creator, he couldn't help but feel slightly nervous. After spending some time calming himself down, Derek quickly ate his food and recovered his combat-ready state. "I wonder what will happen in that temple." Holding the axe of Hurricane, he came to the middle of the group. Within the campsite, lanterns that were covered with a thin layer of animal hide were being lit one after another. 15 Mint Street. Klein heated the water, adjusted the temperature, and took a comfortable bath. With the languidness after a bath, he took 4 steps counterclockwise and went above the gray fog. He intended to use divination to make a confirmation about the evil spirit's matter. In the silence of the ancient palace, Klein leaned back in his chair and began to seriously consider which divination method to choose and how to design the divination statement. It had to conform to the principles of mysticism, it shouldn't involve subdivision or elimination, and it had to contain sufficient information. After a short period of silence, Klein leaned forward and wrote down what he wanted to confirm. "The evil spirit in the ruins harbors strong malice towards Sharon and me." He undid the spirit pendulum on his left wrist, gripped it with one hand, and began entering cogitation. After muttering to himself for a while, he opened his eyes and looked forward. This time, the topaz pendant was wildly rotating clockwise. This meant that the evil spirit's malice was stronger than Klein had imagined. At that time, there was nothing abnormal about the spiritual intuition we had. That evil spirit is also a powerhouse that's good at interfering with divination and prophecy. Heh. He definitely wouldn't have imagined that one of us has the temperance to resist desire, preventing her from being blinded by greed, while the other has experienced too many things to know what it means to ask a tiger for its skin. With a sigh, Klein returned to the real world and laid down on his bed. Unfortunately, the heat brought by the sun brooch is only a psychological feeling and can't warm the bed. Before he fell asleep, he closed his eyes and thought with regret. South of the bridge, Rose Street Harvest Church. After Emlyn White wiped the last chair, he straightened up and eagerly said to Father Otravsky, "I've finished doing today's chore." "Damn old man, don't you suddenly get ideas of getting me to copy the Holy Bible?" Emlyn prayed inwardly. The object of his prayer had unwittingly changed from the moon to Earth Mother. Father Otravsky stood there, making the vampire look like a child. He smiled and said, "Recently, you've been able to experience the joy and relaxation of working with dedication and gratitude. Go back and quietly feel the pulse of life and the pure joy that comes from it. T haven't." Emlyn denied on reflex. Without saying anything, Father Otravsky looked at him with a kind smile, turned and took a seat, and then began his nightly prayer. Emlyn White's lips quivered as he wanted to refute, but in the end, he failed to say anything. He silently left the Harvest Church and habitually closed the door. When he returned to his current residence, he found that the house was empty. Both his parents had disappeared without a trace. It was only after witnessing this scene that he remembered that there was going to be a sanguine gathering in the Backland area tonight. Those fellows are really disgraceful. As noble sanguine, they should sleep in coffins or stay in their own room. Why are they mimicking humans and holding all kinds of gatherings? There's even dancing. Emlyn muttered contemptuously. As he spoke, he touched his belly and swallowed a mouthful of saliva before deciding to change into some clothes to attend the gathering. The Odora family sure is enviable. They actually have a pure human partner who runs several hospitals and has fresh blood every day. They can drink as much as they want, anytime they want. Emlyn put on his black top hat and quickly walked out of the house. Westboro in a brightly lit villa. Emlyn picked up a glass with scarlet liquid and hungrily took a gulp of it. It really has been preselected. He half closed his eyes, sighing in praise from the bottom of his heart. At this moment, on the dance floor, handsome men and beautiful women were dancing, twirling and taking slow steps with each other under the romantic music. What's the point of all of this? Emlyn stood at the edge of the railing on the second floor, looking down at his kinsman. As the largest city in the world, Backland had many vampires living in it. They hid in all walks of life and had completely integrated into human society. As for those who were unable to control their own destructive urges and bloodlust, they were either sent to castles deep in the mountains or were dealt with in advance to prevent the Nighthawks or other official Beyonder organizations from finding clues. As he looked at his fellow kinsmen, who were growing more spirited as the night went on, Emlyn increasingly felt like there was nothing in common between him and them. At that moment, the host of the banquet tonight, Cosme Odora, walked over with a wine cup in hand. Smiling, he asked, "Do you like tonight's wine?" Of course, its owner is young enough and possesses great vitality. Emlyn straightened his back and assumed a noble posture. Based on appearances, Cosme Odora was a very gracious middle-aged gentleman, but Emlyn knew that he was over 200 years old. He had once seen Intis under the rule of Emperor Roselle, and then he moved to Lone because he had lived for too long and feared that his neighbors would discover something was wrong about it. Upon hearing Emlyn's praise, he smiled and said, "Yes, its owner is a young lady who was stabbed by a thief and nearly lost her life. Fortunately, she met me, and this is the price she needs to pay for her recovery. You can have a taste of the wine over there, as well as the wine over there. The owners are from Balam and Fainapotter, respectively. They have different flavors. Fainapotter, Mother Goddess, the humans there love chili so much that their blood has a spiciness that I can't stand. Mother Goddess." As he spoke, Emlyn suddenly paused, his expression instantly turning blank. The corner of Cosme's mouth twitched, and he pretended not to hear anything. In the awkward silence, he cleared his throat and said, "Emlyn, that's just your imagination. By the way, my grandfather wishes to meet you." "Your grandfather?" Emlyn was startled for a moment, but he then immediately widened his eyes. "Lord Nibs." Nibs Odora was a powerful sanguine who had been active in the Fourth Epoch, but the times had corroded his life and forced him to lie in a cold coffin for extended periods of time. Cosme nodded solemnly. "Yes." With that, he turned and walked to another staircase on the second floor, not considering the possibility that Emlyn might refuse him. Emlyn followed, a little nervous and uneasy, thinking about the purpose of Lord Nibs's summit. Has he finally understood that the honor of the sanguine is more important, and has decided to help me get rid of Father Otravsky's psychological cue? As he walked, Emlyn White developed a strong sense of hope. Following the stairs to the underground area, Emlyn White passed through a few secret doors and entered a large gray hall. In the center of the hall was a heavy coffin made of black iron, engraved with symbols and magic labels. After Cosme Odora reported Emlyn's arrival, a heavy and aged voice slowly came out from the coffin. "Emlyn White, do you know why I summoned you?" "Honorable Lord Nibs, I imagine that you are planning on helping me remove the psychological cue," Emlyn responded without hesitation. Silence reigned in the underground hall for a few seconds. Then Nibs Odora, who was lying in the coffin, chuckled and said, "That's one of the purposes, but it won't be me helping you." he just woke up from a long dream because I received a revelation from the ancestor. Ancestor, SHE has awakened. It wasn't Emlyn who exclaimed in surprise, but Cosme Odora. After the cataclysm, doesn't the ancestor only respond to important matters? Emlyn listened in bewilderment. No, not yet, Nibs said in a heavy voice. The ancestor told me that the apocalypse is near and that we must prepare for it. And you, Emlyn White, are one of the key elements in the ancestor's revelation. Apocalypse? Cosme asked in surprise. But Emlyn only had one thought. I am Lynn White was actually mentioned by the ancestor. I'm a key element for the sanguine survival of the apocalypse. Nibs ignored his grandson's question and continued. Emlyn White, I'll hand you a task right now. Please speak. Emlyn felt that he was being too modest. Even after hearing what had just been said, he didn't show any arrogance in front of Lord Nibs. Nibs Odora solemnly said, find a chance to pray to the fool. Emlyn suspected he had heard wrongly. Nibs lowered his voice and added, the fool whose honorific name has only recently been spread. Slip, although I have always had the urge to pray to the fool to get rid of the psychological cue that Father Otravsky gave me, I also know, very clearly, that it's dangerous to recite the honorific name of an unknown being. Not all hidden existences will start with bait and slowly provide guidance. In such matters, they are often like sharks in the sea, who would go mad and lurch forward once they smell blood. But now, Lord Nibs, know, what does the ancestor want? Emlyn White said, finding it rather ridiculous, it will be very, very, very dangerous. Inside the black iron coffin, Nibs Odora replied with an aged voice, yes, under normal circumstances. But not all hidden existences are filled with malice. Among them, they will similarly abide to rules and enjoy transactions. For example, the 7 pure lights of the spirit world. Since the ancestor has given such a revelation, it means that the danger that the fool can bring is not too serious, or even none. And during this entire process, I will always be by your side to protect you. Don't you want to get rid of the psychological cue? Have you already become a believer of Earth Mother and abandoned the moon? No, I haven't. Emlyn frantically denied. After a moment of silence, he gritted his teeth and said, I wish to have a few days to think it over. All right, no problem. I believe that you will make a choice that suits your noble identity as a member of the Sanguine. Inside the coffin, Nibs's voice turned soft as he smiled and comforted him. After sending Emlyn White back to the second floor, Cosme Odora once again returned to the dark and gloomy underground hall, and he asked with confusion and doubt, Grandfather, how could the revelation given by the ancestor involve Emlyn White? He's just a weak member of the Sanguine, who only recently reached adulthood. Nibs's voice came through the thick black metal coffin lid and reverberated in the air. No, the revelation provided by the ancestor never included Emlyn White. She only showed a scene of the dawn of the apocalypse, depicting the erosion of the crimson moon, as well as mentioning the fool and the corresponding honorific name. During this process, no Sanguine appeared. The mention of the key element was just my way of convincing Emlyn White. However, being able to take risks for the future of the Sanguine can also be considered a key element. Cosme was first enlightened before he had another question. Why did you choose Emlyn White? What's so special about him? Nibs Odora suddenly laughed. Hasn't he been clamoring about praying to the fool all this time? Didn't he think that we weren't putting too much weight on his problem, that we aren't willing to antagonize Bishop Otravsky, so he was trying to find other help? Team just fulfilling his wish. For a long time, Cosme was speechless. Emlyn White stood at the railing of the second floor, looked down at his tireless kinsman, and nervously took a sip of his wine. Up to this day, I haven't heard of any terrible outcome for people who prayed to the fool. Perhaps it's just as Lord Nibs said, the fool is just like the 7 pure lights in the spirit world, a hidden existence that maintains order and is warm-hearted. Wait a minute, what are the 7 pure lights in the spirit world? Why haven't I ever heard of them before? They seem to be on the side of good. I wonder if this will be any help to me. In short, the fool isn't necessarily dangerous, and there is Lord Nibs protecting me. Maybe I can take advantage of this opportunity to get rid of the psychological cue. Emlyn consoled himself with fear and anticipation. Monday morning. Sherwood Borough, 15 Mint Street. Klein squatted in front of the toilet, holding a brush and carefully cleaning the dirt inside it. According to his schedule, after completing his visits on Saturday and Sunday, he decided to take a day off and wait until tomorrow to report back to Prince Edisac about the final results and hand over the assignment. But during what should have been his relaxation time, he found the house a little too messy and dirty. It was only when he saw this that he remembered that the cleaning of the house had been done twice a week through the temporary employment of the landlady's maid next door. As the Sammers had gone on holiday to Seville City in Daisy Bay, one of the maids had gone along with them, while another had returned to the countryside after receiving a year-end bonus. 15 Mince Street, where he lived, hadn't been cleaned by anyone for quite some time. Klein had planned to put up with it for 2 days since he was leaving Backland, but in his free time, he didn't dare to take the time to head to the Kellogg Club to have fun. He was afraid of infuriating Prince Edisac, so he could only stay home. Hence, seeing the things that irked him, he changed into his old clothes and began spring cleaning before the new year. He went on to scrub the toilet, wash the bathtub, wipe the windows, mop the floors, clean his equipment, and wash clothes. Klein busied himself from 8 to 11 before barely completing his desired cleanup. Of course, he only did it perfunctorily, without that much attention to detail. Sometimes renting too big a house isn't a good thing. Klein washed his hands and wiped his face with a towel. Walking out of the bathroom and looking at the clean and tidy living room and dining room, and watching the sunlight pierce through the clouds and shine through the transparent glass window, showering golden spots in his house, he had a strange sense of accomplishment. He felt a lot happier. Time to reward myself for lunch. I'll find a good restaurant. Klein returned to the second floor and changed his clothes. As he leafed through the papers, waiting for lunchtime, the doorbell rang. TT's almost the new year, and there are still people coming to entrust me with mission. As he rose and walked to the door, Klein made up his mind to decline. Although he only had £34 left in cash, in order to get out of the royal strife, he had to go on vacation to the south as soon as possible. He could no longer accept assignments. To his surprise, the visitor wasn't a stranger, but the old butler of Prince Edisac. The old butler was wearing a well-cut tuxedo. He saluted without losing his dignity and said, "Detective Moriarty, His Highness the Prince, is waiting for you in the carriage at the end of the street. He wishes to know the progress of your investigation." So impatient. "All right, that saves me the trouble of going all the way to Red Rose Manor tomorrow." Klein quickly reorganized what he had thought of last night and calmly replied, "All right." He was about to remove his hat from the coat rack when he felt a sudden ache in his stomach, a pain that required him to visit the toilet. After enduring for a while, he realized that he couldn't hold it in any longer and apologetically said to the old butler, "I'm very sorry. PLL need to use the bathroom first. My stomach isn't feeling well." The old butler didn't show any abnormal expression. "That's your freedom." As he discharged one wave after another of bliss, clearing away the remnants in his stomach, Klein washed his hands and returned to the hall. At that moment, he noticed that the old butler was no longer around. The one waiting outside was the maid with curly brown hair. "His Highness requested me to apologize to you. He still has matters to attend to and cannot wait for too long. Please go to Red Rose Manor tomorrow, or the afternoon of the day after tomorrow." The maid bowed meticulously. "It hasn't even been 10 minutes, and I'd already done it as fast as I could. Usually, I can continue on for quite a while if I have newspapers." Klein smiled. "No problem." After receiving a response, the maid who had completed her mission immediately felt a weight off her chest. She giggled and said, "Detective Moriarty, you missed that lady again." "Huh?" Klein was at a loss. The maid lowered her voice and said, "This time, the young lady came with His Highness. She was the one who suggested taking a detour to meet you. In the end, I missed her because of my stomachache." "Something isn't right," Klein frowned slightly. In a room padded with a thick and soft carpet, a quill that was being held came to pause and stopped writing. In the open notebook beneath it, there were lines of text and marks of scribbled-out text. Scribbles: "Target attempted to escape control, but unfortunately, Detective Sherlock Moriarty leaves before she heads downstairs." The target influenced the surrounding maids, but Prince Edisac's butler, Funkel, chanced upon the problem and dealt with it. Scribbles: "The target went off track once again. She participated in Talam's funeral on behalf of Prince Edisac. However, having quickly recovered to her normal state, she realized that she was unable to identify Sherlock Moriarty, and she could only let a chance slip. Sherlock Moriarty went to Red Rose Manor to investigate, but the timing wasn't right, and the target happened to be riding horses on the golf course. Scribbles, the target once again, triumphed over the arrangement, encouraging Prince Edisac to visit Detective Sherlock Moriarty. Unfortunately, Sherlock Moriarty happened to have a stomachache, ended up staying in the bathroom for 7 minutes and 45 seconds, and the prince couldn't afford to wait. His facial features were like a sculpture, but the middle-aged man who was blinded in one eye put down his quill and looked at a woman. What exactly did you put on her body? Breaking through the restrictions time and time again will create big problems. The woman laughed in a low voice and said, "It was just an accident. Don't worry, there won't be any problems." As she spoke, she pulled back her hair, revealing her long white neck. After that, she slowly applied various things to her face, making her look even more alluring. Seeing that she was putting on her clothes and accessories, the dark golden-haired middle-aged man frowned and asked, "Where are you going?" The woman didn't directly answer and said with a smile, "Be careful of the quill in your hand. You almost exchanged bodies with someone the last time." "You don't need to remind me," the middle-aged man with deep blue eyes to the point of being black said with a straight face. The woman tightened her belt to make herself look thinner, then she lazily stretched and yawned while covering her mouth. "Team going to pay a visit to Mr. A of the Aurora Order. T hope he's as crazy as the rumors say." As she spoke, the expression of the blind middle-aged man suddenly sank. It was because that ordinary quill had begun to write on its own, as though an invisible hand was holding on to it. Explorations above the gray fog, the ancient temple-like building stood quietly. After noticing some abnormalities in the series of coincidences, Klein entered the mysterious space after lunch, in an attempt to confirm a guess in his mind. He picked up a fountain pen he conjured, paused for 2 seconds, and then wrote, "I am involved in a series of coincidences created by sealed artifact 008. Putting down the dark red pen, Klein held the silver chain in his left hand and began his divination. Finally, he opened his eyes and looked at the spirit pendulum just inches away from him. The topaz pendant stood still without any rotation. This meant that the divination had failed. Divination cannot be completed, possibly due to not fulfilling sufficient conditions, or it could be because 008 is resisting it. In both cases, a similar result would occur. Klein changed his statement and tried to direct it at different targets, but all of them failed. He tapped the edge of the long mottled table with his finger, hesitating on whether he should go to Red Rose Manor the day after tomorrow. If there's no 008 or a similar power to arrange these matters, then my sudden escape will definitely raise Prince Edisac's suspicion. No, my escape might not be successful. Prince Edisac's men live next door, of course. Since I'm already a faceless, it's easy for me to find a chance to escape when I'm out, but is there a need to go this far? Tomorrow afternoon, I'll be able to leave Backland without attracting too much attention by honestly seeking an audience with Prince Edisac and normally handing over the mission. His Highness will likely not force me, an unaffiliated Beyonder, to accomplish too difficult a task. If there really is a sealed artifact or demigod like 008 influencing the recent events, then from my past experience, I should just be a side character who mistakenly entered the stage and haven't received enough attention. In this case, escaping is tantamount to telling the other party that I have detected your presence. I'm highly problematic. In this way, relying on my faceless powers wouldn't necessarily allow me to escape the attention that has locked onto me. The best method would be to calmly go to the Red Rose Manor and go through the normal procedures to exit the stage. After graciously bowing from the curtain call, I'll fade away from the attention of the unknown party. After combining the two elements, Klein finally decided to pretend that he hadn't discovered anything and to leave Backland according to plan. The bonfire in the campsite was burning with flames, and there was someone standing guard inside the campsite the entire time. Derek Berg leaned against a stone pillar and slept to recover his strength. At this moment, he was dreaming of the endless grayish-white fog, an ancient chair situated at the highest point in the center, as well as the indifferent figure sitting on that chair, overlooking everything. "Mr. Fool," Derek said the name in a chanting manner in his mind. Following that, he heard the fool's voice, "Prepare for the gathering." "Yes, Mr. Fool." Derek answered silently and began counting his heartbeats. His eyes never opened, as if everything that had just happened was just a prelude to a dream. There's still quite a bit of time before we set off. There's enough time to attend the tarot gathering, he thought with relief. He originally imagined that he, who had joined the exploratory team, would miss this gathering. After 1,000 heartbeats, Derek waited a little longer before he felt himself entering that quiet and serene divine hall. The moment he opened his eyes, scenes flashed through his mind. It was as if an external force had instantly injected all his lost memories into his head once again. Scenes were crumbling city walls, buildings crisscrossed with white and blue, the temple of the fallen creator with a similar architectural style as the City of Silver, murals detailing the approaching apocalypse and the fallen creator's protection of the remaining humans from the 6 great evil gods, the beautiful and dangerous mushrooms, and Jack, the eerie pale yellow-haired boy of unknown origin. These kinds of scenes had repeated over and over again for a total of 5 times, but each time there was a slight difference in the detail. The first time, outside the fallen creator's temple, all of the animal hide lanterns had been extinguished, nearly causing a tragedy. The second time, someone lost control of themselves and almost swallowed a mushroom. Fortunately, Chief Collins stopped them in time. The third time, the little boy, Jack, told a story, which was that he and his father had been searching for the creator's holy residence in the endless ocean, and they ended up encountering a huge storm. The fourth time, Joshua was severely injured by Jack, who had mutated without any warning. The fifth time, the temple completely collapsed, blocking the exit of the underground area. And all of these occurrences ended with Demon Hunter Colin killing the little boy, Jack, and then started off with their rest in the camp, preparing to enter the ruined city. The beginning and end were connected, as it repeated in a cycle. We've explored the temple 5 times, we have been living through this experience all this time, and there is no way to truly end it. The more Derek understood his sudden new memories, the more frightened and terrified he became. Audrey, who was sitting on the other side of the long bronze table, originally wanted to greet Mr. Fool and the others with a cheerful and light voice as usual. However, when she glanced over, she immediately noticed that little Sun's mood wasn't right. She immediately asked, "Mr. Sun, did something happen? Has the exploration of the true, fallen creator's temple not gone smoothly?" Derek seemed to have grabbed onto hope, as he hurriedly described the rough situation once. When he was done, he said, "After that little boy was dealt with by His Excellency, we all closed our eyes and woke up in the campsite outside the city in preparation to begin a brand new exploration. We no longer had any memories from before. This process has been repeated 5 times, with only the details being slightly different. If it wasn't for Mr. Fool's alerting me to this, then I wouldn't have even known that I've been living a recurring life all this time." He took it for granted that the extra memories from his arrival above the gray fog were the result of Mr. Fool's reminder. He stood up and gave a solemn salute to the blurry figure seated at the head of the long bronze table. "I only understood the situation after listening to your description." Klein was still in a daze. He maintained his original posture and lightly nodded his head in response. In a situation where the reasons are unknown, a superior wouldn't so easily express his opinion, so I can't rashly open my mouth. Klein secretly reviewed what he had learned from his past life as a keyboard warrior. Seeing that Mr. Fool seemed to be an imperturbable ancient wall, Derek felt a lot more at ease and felt that the matter could finally be resolved. He turned to look at the hanged man, the world, justice, and the magician, and he sincerely asked, "Do you know the root of the problem? How can this be resolved?" The zealous Audrey instinctively wanted to answer, but she found herself without a clue or even a guess. Fours was in a similar state as she was. Filled with rich knowledge from Earth, and having read many novels of being stuck in the same day, Klein originally wanted to control the world, to give out ideas, to give everyone some inspiration to consider regarding the matter. But after thinking about it carefully, he chose to stay low-key and prepared to observe first. After listening to the son's description, Alger remained silent for a long time. At this moment he said in a measured tone, "I can only think of 2 possibilities. First, you have encountered a nightmare or hallucinatory power at a level that exceeds a demigod. After regaining your memories with Mr. Fool's help, you should be able to immediately detect something amiss once you return to the real world. That way, the problem will easily be resolved. Second, you were forced to, or you proactively entered a strange space or state at a particular node where time is controlled to flow in a certain manner. But the time is fixed within a certain range which is cyclical, and the continuation is balanced. That is to say, it is relatively static. In this situation, there aren't many ways to end the cycle. Either there is an external force that can forcefully break the balance, or you find the key point that connects the distortion of time. an external force that can forcefully break the balance. Upon hearing this, Audrey, Fours, and Derek all subconsciously glanced at the calm and leisurely Mr. Fool sitting at the end of the long bronze table. No, I can't always seek Mr. Fool's help by not saying anything directly. He probably wishes to test my ability at dealing with such matters. After a moment of thought, he said, Mr. Hanged Man, let's assume the second situation. In your opinion, what do you think is the key point that connects the distortion of time? Without waiting for the Hanged Man to respond, Audrey guessed with interest, that little boy Jack. You can't kill him when you're facing him. Alger nodded. That's a possibility. He hesitated for a moment before saying, the son's description of Jack and his father reminds me of a particular incident. He turned to look at Miss Justice. Didn't I once mention that I was pursuing a listener of the Aurora Order at sea? The goal for his voyage was to seek the true Creator's holy residence. Audrey carefully recalled and said without any strong confirmation, that seems to be the case. Alger immediately said with a deep voice, that listener also brought his son, and the son's age is very close to the son's description of Jack. Are you saying that Jack went from your world to the vicinity of the City of Silver? Derek asked, stunned. After a short period of settling down, he inwardly felt an indescribable sense of happiness. This means that the City of Silver hasn't been completely sealed off yet. There's still a chance to connect with the normal world where the Hanged Man and Justice are from. T can only say that it is possible. The Hanged Man couldn't give an affirmative answer. He thought for a moment and suggested, you can find a chance to bring up the Sanya Sea, the Lone Kingdom, and the Port City in front of Jack. Perhaps there will be a different reaction, but of course, try to avoid doing so in front of the chief of your City of Silver as much as possible. Also, the key point doesn't necessarily lie with Jack. We have to consider other possibilities as well. You should tell us the specifics, such as the details of the mural, and maybe we can find something useful. At this point, Alger began to look forward to receiving information. Enthusiastic Hanged Man, unlike the past, Derek was clearly smarter. He didn't clumsily rely only on words to provide a description. After receiving Mr. Fool's permission, he conjured a series of scenes from the memories that he could recall. He showed the exploratory process and the points he found important to the Hanged Man, Justice, the Magician, and the world in a fragmented fashion, and then he included some explanations for them. Walls that had collapsed in the darkness, the streets that passed through the destroyed buildings, the stone pillar-propped white and blue ancient temple that was covered in dust under the light of the animal hide lantern, the statue that hung upside down from a pitch-black cross, the series of murals depicting the fallen creator who suffered from the sin in place of humanity, the exceptionally alluring mushrooms, the statue at the altar that had strangely opened its eye, and the young yellow-haired Jack who had been hiding in the back. All these scenes took shape and were reflected in the eyes of the Tarot Club members in the most direct and realistic manner. The gloomy and dark tone, the sense of crisis with every step that was taken, and the bizarre development that the son was experiencing made Audrey rather excited. She became extremely interested in what he was saying. This is the situation around the City of Silver. It's more attractive than any novel I've ever read. This is the charm of mystery, uncertainty, and terror combined, of course, to the humans who live there. This isn't a good thing. Audrey's thoughts were in disarray. She wanted nothing more than to immediately become a powerhouse at the level of a demigod and venture into that region ruled by darkness and storm. Klein watched and sighed emotionally. He was sighing because it truly wasn't easy for the City of Silver to last all this time in such an environment. He sighed because little son still wasn't smart enough and had no experience. Otherwise, he would have been able to completely present the events that happened in the form of a movie or documentary. It would certainly be exciting and attractive. However, this way, the description would take too long. My spirituality wouldn't be able to endure if everyone were to watch such a movie. Also, the longer one stays above the gray fog, the more likely it is that something bad will happen in the outside world. Klein suddenly felt lucky. Alger finished watching in silence as he thought over it. He got the son to pick a few important points. He had chosen to present them above the long bronze table. Among them included the mural of the fallen creator, resisting the 6 evil gods. Which evil gods are these? Alger looked at the octopus with lightning wrapped around its body, black waves at its feet, an avian feathered cloak on its back, and a 3-pronged trident in its hand as he began to make connection. Derek shook his head honestly. Don't know. I thought you would know them. Audrey and Fours cast their gazes over at the same time, carefully observing them several times, but they still failed to come up with any guesses. They had originally thought that these were 6 of the 8 ancient gods from the legends of the City of Silver, but they couldn't find a suitable match. After all, there was a dragon, an elf, a giant, a phoenix, and an annihilation demonic wolf, while there was only one giant in the mural. This, the fool took a serious look, and his pupils nearly contracted. In consideration of his standing, he had only taken a cursory look at the mural in the beginning, but now he finally realized that something was wrong. This is very similar to the statues of the 6 gods which I saw in the Tudor family's underground ruin, except that one is a normal version and the other is a corrupted version. It really is a bit hard for people to look at it directly, especially Earth Mother, Lord of Storms, and Eternal Blazing Sun. Not only have they been sullied as evil gods, but they're even akin to ugly monsters. Klein didn't feel a sense of sudden enlightenment from having realized the truth. He had expected the true creator to disparage the 6 gods and distort their images. However, I can't completely ignore the possibility of this mural appearing. Just like how I had always thought that the Orthodox gods didn't have a human form, with only symbols left. As a result, the statues in the ruins of the Tudor family have made me less certain. It seems like the establishment of the images of the gods have undergone a long evolution, and many secrets are hidden within. Klein was relieved when he saw that Miss Justice was focusing on examining the mural and didn't pay attention to Mr. Fool's attitude. Because it involved whether or not little son could get out of the strange predicament of repeating that short period of life, he decided to tell them what he knew. Of course, the long introduction and display of the images of the 6 gods inside the underground ruin didn't fit the identity of the fool. He intended to control the world to complete this task, and this was in line with his goal of making the world in Sherlock Moriarty equivalent. The fool should enigmatically say, Evernight Sun, Storm, Wisdom, Earth, Giant, and then give no explanation with superfluous descriptions. Klein thought for 2 seconds and let the world say in a hoarse voice, I've seen similar statues. After attracting everyone's gaze, he paused and added, in an adventure to a 4th epoch ruin. Audrey was very interested, but she maintained her basic level of restraint. Mr. World, what kind of statues were there? Can you show it to us? Of course, if you aren't willing to, or if you require compensation, it's negotiable. There's no need, as this might also solve some of my doubts. The World smiled darkly. He acted by making a request to Mr. Fool, and when he got permission, he conjured the statues of the 6 gods and their corresponding sacred emblem. With her head against the full moon, the lady, who wore layers upon layers of hazy dresses that didn't repeat, gave off an exceptionally beautiful feeling. On her long black skirt, there were also specks of starlight, as if it were a night sky, and on top of that iconic Evernight sacred emblem. Audrey immediately recognized her to be the Evernight goddess she worshipped. This statue was most similar to the evil god in the upper left corner of the mural, but its face was more human, and there were no strange eyes hidden around. What sacrilege! This is sacrilegious to the goddess. Audrey was a little angry, but she quickly calmed down. As the most infamous evil god, it's expected that the true creator would let his followers disfigure the goddess. But why would there be a humanoid sculpture of the goddess in the underground ruins? Isn't it said that the Orthodox gods only have symbols? Audrey frowned slightly, lost in thought. Alger felt somewhat enlightened as he said with a sigh, so the murals depict the distorted images of the 6 gods. They really had humanoid images in the past. Perhaps this is the reason why the churches have always been trying to find the forsaken land of the gods. As for the forsaken land of the gods, it's most likely hidden in the depths of the Sonya Sea. Yes, it definitely doesn't exist in a normal state. Otherwise, it would be impossible for the deities to not notice it, Alger added silently inwardly. The son was first taken aback before he came to a realization. Mr. Hanged Man, are these the deities that all of you mentioned before, the Evernight goddess, the Lord of Storms? Yes, the Hanged Man gave an affirmative answer. What do they have to do with the apocalypse? What does it have to do with our land being forsaken by the Lord? Derek subconsciously pressed. Unfortunately, no one could answer him. Force raised her hand in confusion. Why is there no god of steam and machinery? This was the god she believed in. In the northern and southern continents, the 7 gods had always been equal. Rumor has it that the god of steam and machinery, also known as the god of craftsmanship, wasn't born until the 4th epoch. From the looks of it, it's true, and the time node at which he was born seems to be in the late 4th epoch, not in the early or mid-4th epoch. The hanged man said, a mixture of explanations and guesses. He had an unconcealable enthusiasm for such topics. So that's the case. Forrest felt a little guilty, as she had never read the Steam and Machinery Bible seriously, and her faith appeared as just a way of life. Derek didn't harp on the previous matter and instead asked, is this mural the key point? Perhaps you can try to break it, but don't let the chief suspect you. The hanged man was about to say that he shouldn't attempt to pronounce the honorific names of one of the 6 gods, or else he, or they, might directly descend into the forsaken land of the gods, but after careful consideration, he realized that the little son didn't know the corresponding honorific names at all. All right. Thank you, Mr. Hanged Man. You're always so kind and enthusiastic. Also, Miss Justice, Miss Magician, and Mr. World, you are similarly as kind-hearted. Derek thanked them sincerely. Kind? Enthusiastic? The hanged man was momentarily unsure of how to react. This was the first time that someone had used such words to describe it. After the discussion was over, Klein suddenly remembered something. In the previous exploration of the abandoned temple of the true creator, the city of Silver found the name Rose Redemption. However, it didn't seem to pay attention to this. It can't be ignored. According to the evil spirit in the underground ruin, this extremely secretive organization is an organization led by fallen angels, and it is in no way inferior to the Twilight Hermit Order. Perhaps the cyclic time was set up by them. Thinking of this, the fool, who was sitting upright in a high-backed chair, leisurely adjusted his posture and used his fingers to lightly tap the edge of the long, mottled table. Audrey immediately turned her head and looked at Mr. Fool in excitement, waiting for him to give a hint. The hanged man, the sun, the magician, and the world also looked expectantly at Mr. Fool. Mid the fog, Klein chuckled and said, Rose Redemption. Rose Redemption. What is that, the key point of getting out of this predicament? That's right, there's such a name in the corner of a mural near the top of the temple. Derek seemed to understand something. Alger, Audrey, and Fours also recalled and gave the name Rose Redemption high importance, but they didn't fully understand the true meaning that Mr. Fool was trying to convey. Honorable Mr. Fool, what does Rose Redemption represent? Audrey raised her hand and took the initiative to ask. This time, Klein didn't respond other than giving a short laugh. His idea was very simple. The organization, the Rose Redemption, was intricately tied to the true creator. No matter what happened in the temple, it would always point to them in some way. As for whether this name was a so-called key point, Klein wasn't sure or worried. After all, he held the right to interpretation. If the sun and the others misunderstood the real meaning, how could it be Mr. Fool's fault? Seeing the fool chuckling silently, Audrey and the others had no choice but to withdraw their gaze and stop asking questions. In a situation like this, where they were only given hints and not explanations, they didn't find it problematic. Existences at the level of deities typically had similar habits, and sometimes, what they gave weren't even hints but revelation. In the eyes of a powerful figure like Mr. Fool, just providing a single name is enough. Our failure to comprehend things is because we are lacking. We need to work harder at figuring out and attempting things. Audrey was increasingly looking forward to her future as a psychiatrist. Remember that there was something related to Rose Redemption in that semi-abandoned temple. Alger tilted his head and looked at the sun. Without any hesitation, Derek nodded and said, yes. It was text derived from Jotun in a corner of the murals. We used quite some time to decipher those words. Text derived from Jotun. Alger hadn't paid much attention to this detail before, but he couldn't help but make connections at that moment in time. That little boy, Jack, seems to have gone there from the Sanya Sea. Text derived from Jotun. Alger deliberated before making a request to conjure a line of text. Those words were in ancient Fasak, the origins of the northern continent's language, and they meant Rose Redemption. Derek took a closer look and was stunned. TT's very close, but the way that the words end is handled differently. Mr. Hanged Man, is this a language from where you come from? As he spoke, Derek conjured the text on the mural again. Yes. Alger gave an affirmative answer. This language itself has evolved. The one you found should be of an earlier type. In the world of linguistics, this type of language, which is similar to ancient Fasak, is widely regarded as a characteristic of the Solomon Empire. Historian Klein gave the most accurate answer in his mind. Alger paused. What about the content of the corresponding mural? He wasn't in charge of that area, and I didn't take a careful look before departing. Derek instantly felt ashamed. Alger nodded without a change in expression. Find a chance to clarify this. There might be a crucial point hidden within. All right. Derek was increasingly convinced that things weren't so bad after all. Seeing that he had relaxed quite a bit, Audrey was a little curious and a little puzzled as she asked, Mr. Hanged man, if that young boy named Jack is the child of the listener you described, why would he be able to communicate with the son and the others? After discussing the corresponding terms for Rose redemption, she was completely certain that the City of Silver used a different language compared to the other countries in the northern and southern continent like Loam. And above the gray fog, everyone is able to communicate fluently, without any gaps in communication. It's all thanks to Mr. Fool's powers, Audrey praised in her heart. Alger scoffed as he looked at her. Miss Justice, you haven't experienced any Beyonder events, have you? Jack has already become such a terrifying monster, so what else can he change? Trust me, there are times when language knowledge is very easy to obtain, with it taking just a second or two. See. Audrey blinked, feeling that she had once again exposed that she didn't have much experience or knowledge in mysticism. After this matter came to a close, the tarot gathering resumed as per the usual schedule. Audrey looked towards the end of the long bronze table and said, Mr. Fool, this time there are 3 more Roselle diary pages. I still owe you 7. Upon hearing that, Forbes hurriedly added, Mr. Fool, I also received some responses. There will be new Roselle diary pages the next time. Very well. Klein chuckled in response. By the side, Derek suddenly felt ashamed again, because he hadn't had time to visit the library last week to look through any material and memorize historical details due to his participation in the exploratory team. After a simple process, Klein picked up the 3 diary pages which were conjured, and he began to read with great anticipation. 8th August. For the first time, I was invited to the White Maple Palace to attend a ball held by His Majesty. These aristocrats are really F-seeking extravagant, with the food they eat completely being in pursuit of novelty. Things like grilled swans, sheep's testicles. Have to say, I was very surprised at the beginning. The aristocrats of this world, yes, this is limited only to aristocrats, really love cleanliness. It's common for them to take baths, and toilet paper has already taken a nascent form. They totally aren't like the aristocrats of Earth's Middle Ages. He originally thought that this was an effect of the existence of true gods, but I was later informed that this was an improvement that had to be made because of some kind of threat. Beyonders of a particular sequence are able to spread the plague through dirty habits. I wonder which pathway and sequence that is. At that time, my first thought was that there's something wrong with these aristocrats' brains, right? Since they're afraid of the plague, why don't they clean up the streets? Why didn't they build a complete sewage system? Why don't they uplift the slums? They're all in the same city. Does this mean that this place will be fine when there's a plague over there? Well, with water sources, food, and people isolated, and them moving only in one direction, perhaps it really will be all right. But there are plagues that can be transmitted through the air. When I hold a high position, I must push for urban planning and clean up the environment. Even without the plague, just living in such a stinking city is still very annoying. Oh right, I've been summoned tonight by His Majesty. He thought that since I was born on earth, I, who received an education of all men being equal, would be neither humble nor arrogant and appear rather calm. But in fact, I remained very nervous and excited, unconsciously bending my waist and bowing my head. Of course, I know that in terms of dignity I'm equal to the king. This is the charm of power. Even though this entire page is filled with daily activities, the emperor has still managed to make me laugh. He was also someone with a goal. Indeed, even for someone born in the modern world, they will still become apprehensive and sycophantic when faced with someone of high status, a person who can influence their fates. Klein smiled, his mood much more relaxed. He turned to the second page and continued reading. 11th November. About to advance to sequence 4 to become a demigod. After this, as long as I don't lose control, then my life's natural order will experience a qualitative change. I would no longer be a short-lived creature. Of course, different sequences of different pathways will be in different states. I face 2 choices. One is alchemist of the savant pathway, and the other is mysticologist of the mystery prior pathway. Eventually, I chose not to change pathway, since the hidden sage is a very dangerous existence. However, I ultimately suspect that he isn't a real deity. Perhaps he is of a slightly lower level. After becoming an alchemist, I will be able to inject soul into the items I create and give them life. This is the feeling of being a creator. It will definitely be excellent. It's also the reason why I continued choosing this Beyonder pathway. After obtaining this sequence's Beyonder characteristic, I should be able to complete more of my concepts. There will come a day when the saying, "It's not that we aren't working hard, it's just that the cheat has a Gundam." It will be a Gundam in the truest meaning of the word. The only problem is that the corresponding ritual of alchemist needs to extract all the life force of a particular region, desertification of the land, and the drying of lakes. Why is this not much different from a cult's sacrificial ritual? Tiev always felt that the potion sequence system has too many dark and crazy parts to it. Occasionally, it would be so evil that it can make one despair. The Emperor also feels the same way. Seeing this, Klein couldn't help but sigh. Sometimes, he also felt that the background color of this world was grayish-black and crazy. Things like the law of Beyonder characteristics conservation and indestructibility, the laws of pathway convergence, and interchangeability of close sequences all bring about change that leads to tragedy. Alchemist is a very interesting sequence. Alchemical life sounds forbidden and is a domain very close to that of deities. I wonder if the Emperor made any Gundams before he was assassinated. Probably not. Klein's thoughts drifted away for a moment. He was rather curious about the ritual of becoming a demigod-like high-sequence Bayon. Unfortunately, Roselle didn't record much of it. After all, it was a diary, not a notebook. Sequence 4 Mysticologist of the Mystery Prior Pathway sounds good too. Klein turned over the second diary page and displayed the third page in front of him. 23rd April. This bunch of aristocrats really are a mess. I even thought that Ma'am Corinne had seduced me for sex because she had taken a fancy for my inner self. But who knew that her husband, the Earl of Champagne, was peeping in the opposite room? He was even thrilled, and even F. King wanted to FK me. I'm sorry, but I just can't accept it, so I had to kick him out of the room. Compared to their family, I'm just a pure child. Klein was momentarily speechless. He felt that the private life of Emperor Roselle was really filled with excitement, and that many of the Inti's aristocracy were also sufficiently eccentric. If some aristocrat tries to seek novelty and finds a curly-haired baboon, some kind of disease might even be born. Klein sighed and looked down. 25th April. To cultivate my character and hone my mind, I went fishing at Swan Lake. I hope that one day I can go fishing at sea for a mermaid. I've been quite depraved recently. I have to invigorate my spirit and invent more things. I can't leave any gaps. Since I transmigrated to this world, I will brand this era with my name. Emperor, it's better if you had fallen into depravity. Klein's mouth twitched without any intention of making comment. Then he calmly looked at the last diary entry on the last page. 26th April. Zaratul came visiting. I deliberately asked him what a miracle was. He asked me in return about what I thought it was. What I think it is. There is only one miracle in my heart, and that is the wonders of civilization. For example, the great Twilight Hall of the Fasek Empire, the former residence of the giant king, Almir. Zaratul finally gave a direct answer. He said, "What is a miracle? A miracle is to be resurrected from the dead." On questions, a miracle is to be resurrected from the dead. Klein suddenly remembered what had happened to him. The head injury of a man who shot himself in the head miraculously healing. A Beyonder who, having died from having his heart crushed, crawled out of his grave in the middle of the night. Are these considered miracles of being resurrected from the dead? Is this the miracle the leader of the secret order, Zaratul, spoke of? And sequence 2 of the seer pathway is called a miracle invoker. At this moment, Klein felt like he had grasped something important, but he was unable to piece together all the clues to form the truth he wanted. As I had guessed before, there are other factors at work for my choice of having seer as my beginning sequence. My greatest support is the mysterious space above the gray fog, which happens to eliminate all interference and provide seers the most coveted environment. My characteristic of resurrection also seems to have come from the gray fog as well. When I came to Backland, the events in which Nimble Right Master Risego was involved in were naturally drawn to me, which is consistent with the convergence of Beyonder characteristics of the same pathway. higher quality it is, the stronger the attraction as the effects appear intermittently. The sudden change in the Antigonus family notebook style of passing key information to me, related to the main peak of the Hornisus mountain range via the misfortune cloth puppet, might also be a result of such elements, combined with the other miscellaneous phenomena. Does it mean that this mysterious space has a very close relationship with the Seer Beyonder pathway? This is a grade O sealed artifact of the corresponding sequence. Or perhaps it's a divine kingdom, left behind by a sequence O of the same pathway. There's also the possibility of it being the so-called uniqueness of the seer pathway. Klein moved his gaze away from Roselle's diary, his anticipation for advancing to a high-sequence Beyonder increasing. He wondered what he would discover in the hidden area after he completed the staircase of light. Perhaps the reason for my transmigration and the way home will be found there. He suppressed his excitement and allowed Roselle's diary pages to disappear from his hand. At the same time, he became increasingly wary of the leader of the secret order, Zaratal. He was a powerful existence that had long since become a miracle invoker from the seer pathway many years ago. There might be times and matters that have his fingerprints hidden all over them. Although all of these thoughts were churning in his mind, Klein acted as though nothing had happened as he calmly said, "You can begin your transaction." Fors immediately turned to look at Miss Justice, who sat on the same side of the table, and she said with expectation, "I have received a reply. My teacher has a pair of mirror dragon eyes. The price is £1,000. Upon saying that, Fors felt a little uneasy. This was because Dorian Gray Abraham's reserve price was £800, which was already at a premium above the usual £500–600. And on that foundation, she had added another £200. After attending so many tarot gatherings and all kinds of Beyonder circles, I finally understand one thing. Just like Emperor Roselle said, money isn't omnipotent, but nothing can be done without money. Although I've already received the fixed payment for my new book and have savings reaching £350, there's still the Spirit Eater stomach pouch awaiting me. There's also all kinds of expenses needed for sequence 7, 6, 5, and even 4. The meaning before Mr. Fool's secret hint is that I should be able to be freed from the curse of the full moon once I become a high-sequence Beyonder, even if I can find some of them through teacher. I can't fully rely on him and the Abraham family. In this regard, saving up money on my own isn't enough, and efforts must be made to make money. The price of £1,000 is really expensive. If Miss Justice wishes to bargain, I'll later tell her that teacher agreed to lower the price by £100 after repeated negotiations. As Fors waited for the reply, she consoled herself. £1,000. Audrey never expected to receive news for the psychiatrist's potion ingredients so quickly, so she subconsciously asked in a confirming tone. Without waiting for reply from Fors, she happily added, "Okay, deal." Although she still owed Viscount Glaint a final installment and still owed the Fool's adorer £2,000, she would officially be declared an adult at the New Year's ball. Not only would her control over her wealth be greater than ever before, but she would also receive many valuable gifts, such as the one promised by her father, Earl Hall, a few days earlier. He had promised to give his dear daughter a further £50,000 in Backland bank shares and more than £2,000 in cash. Hence, £1,000 wasn't a number that she was bothered with. Audrey had originally asked Mr. Fool to extend the payment period of the £2,000 to February or March in order, on the one hand, to pay off her debt to Viscount Glaint, and to save up money as discreetly as possible without arousing suspicion. On the other hand, she had to set aside an additional budget for the ingredients of the psychiatrist's potion. Now was the time to use the budget. At most, I'll have to tighten my belt like how I did for the past few months. After March, there wouldn't be any problems. Audrey thought, not troubled at all. She agreed. Fors was both happy and confused. Fors asked Mr. Fool to bear witness to the transaction and arranged for Miss Justice to make the payment first before she delivered the Beyonder ingredient on Wednesday. As Fors decided to head for Pritz Harbor immediately upon receiving the cash, without wasting any time in the middle, she looked at the three gentlemen, the sun, the hanged man, and the world. Does anyone have any information on the Spirit Eater stomach pouch? After calming down, she discovered that with her experience in the acting method, she could digest the excess Beyonder characteristic much faster than she had expected. 1 week was almost equivalent to 2 weeks of the past. In about 10 days, she would be able to completely digest and resolve the problem. When she gathers the ingredients and advances to Trickmaster, She felt that she would be able to perfectly pass the first test given by her teacher, Dorian. She would gain more attention and would no longer be a mere student who was taken in out of gratitude. Derek nodded and said, I was just about to tell you that during this exploration, we obtained some spirit eater stomach pouches. I can exchange it at low prices after I return to the City of Silver. That's under the premise that I'm no longer under surveillance. Okay, but it seems that you have no use for gold pound. Forbes asked directly. After the operation to save Little Sun, she had a preliminary understanding of the City of Silver. Without waiting for the son to say a word, Alger interjected, You can hand me the corresponding cash or gold coins to me. 300 pounds is a very reasonable price. I will provide the Solar High Priest potion formula to the son. Mr. Hanged Man, you have the formula to Solar High Priest. Derek asked in pleasant surprise. During his previous patrols and his recent explorations, he had increasingly felt that the powers of the Sun pathway were perfect for dealing with the dark. Although the giant pathway sequence 6 Dawn Paladin could already create the light of dawn, in the realm of the holy and light, it's still inferior to a light supplement. The Hanged Man nodded slightly and said, That's right. He had found the Solar High Priest potion formula in a treasury of the Rorsted Archipelago, but it was only recently that he had found an opportunity to provide sufficient justification and have the sufficient conditions to have the right to read it once. The reason that he gave was that people suspected to be priests of the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun had appeared on the Sanya Sea, and since he was temporarily unable to return to the Intis Republic, he could only search for the potion ingredients corresponding to Solar High Priest. Moreover, the hatred for the Eternal Blazing Sun could turn mere rumors into the basis for action by the Church of the Lord of Storm. Derek was delighted at first, but he soon said with some awkwardness, The value of the Sequence 7 potion formula is higher than a spirit eater's stomach pound. I don't have the gold pounds all of you were talking about. You can repay it with ingredients of the same value, the Hanged Man gave a terse response. But I don't know what I can get from you first. You should make a list of the common monsters found around the City of Silver and their corresponding ingredients. I'll then choose from that list. No problem. After this exploration is over, I will do it as quickly as possible. Derek was visibly relieved. By the side, Klein wanted to facepalm, but in the end, he didn't manipulate the world to break the deal. It was because he also wanted to know what kind of monsters and ingredients were common around the City of Silver. As Audrey secretly sighed, the Hanged Man looked around and raised his request. "You need a pair of Dragonite Sea Condor eyes. I'll pay the necessary compensation." He only mentioned the Dragonite Sea Condor eyes. In other words, Mr. Hanged Man has clues regarding the Blue Shadow Falcon's crystalline feathers. He really does have many channels and resources. Audrey, who had seen the potion formula for Wind Blessed, thought with some enlightenment. After the transactions came to an end, they began to freely exchange information about their areas, and the end of the tarot gathering quickly approached. During the process, the world inquired for clues about mermaids and obtained an answer similar to the one he had received from Sharon. When everything was over, Klein, who had been watching quietly, thought it necessary to warn Miss Justice and Miss Magician. A terrifying object that is suspected to be a Grade O sealed artifact has appeared around Prince Edisac. It might even involve 008, which would definitely not be a simple matter. Furthermore, the last time a similar situation occurred, Tingen City had faced the threat of an evil god spawn, and it had almost disappeared from the map. Hence, now there's also a hidden danger in Backland. Klein thought for a few seconds, making the world say in a hoarse voice, "Ladies and gentlemen, I have recently received some information that a major event is brewing in Backland. This will bring about a great deal of unrest and may lead to tragedy." "What's the major event?" Audrey asked with concern. Unknowingly, her brow had begun to slightly furrow. Don't know." The world shook his head calmly. Where would the element of unrest and the possible tragedy come from? Forbes asked nervously. From the previous gatherings, she had confirmed that Mr. World's sources were trustworthy. The world acted stumped as he shook his head and said, "There's contradictory information, making it impossible for me to give a definite answer." Upon saying this, he looked up and earnestly cast his gaze towards the figure within the gray fog at the end of the modeled table. "Honorable Mr. Fool, your adorer in Backland must have detected something right." Everyone's eyes immediately focused towards the end of the long bronze table, with everyone feeling different feelings: curiosity, worry, anticipation, and tenseness. With the attention on him, Klein leaned back and said in a casual tone, "Edisac Augustus." "Prince Edisac Augustus. What connection does he have with the danger that might lead to tragedy? Moreover, this matter seems to have received the attention of Mr. Fool." Audrey instantly matched the name with a face, giving rise to great worry and doubt in her. In her opinion, things that caught the attention of Mr. Fool were either very dangerous, extremely secretive, or had far-reaching importance, and were by no means simple. For example, the true creator had attempted to descend upon Backland with the help of Lanevis and the harsh conditions of East Borough's factory district, Emperor Roselle's Dark Emperor card, or the death of the Duke Negan, and the Twilight Hermit Order. Taking these examples into account, Audrey had good reason to believe that, if not handled well or given too little attention, the major event involving Prince Edisac would inevitably lead to a very, very terrible storm. Yes, Prince Edisac hasn't bothered me for quite some time, and I was only relieved by that and didn't think too much about it. Now it does seem a little problematic. At the previous ball, he still warmly kept me back to discuss some boring topics, trying his hand at pompous bad humor. But just 2 or 3 days after that, he turned rather cold and had even deliberately avoided me. I have to find a chance to ask Father about him, but I can't show too much curiosity, or else it might be very possible that he would agree to the royal family's marriage request. Audrey recalled some details, and she suddenly felt her shoulders sink from the weight. She had never liked Prince Edisac, including his 2 elder brothers, and she had no intention of becoming a princess consort. As for the reason, it was very simple. The followers of the Evernight goddess couldn't accept that the Augustus family had believed in the Lord of Storms for generations, which meant their arrogance, pomposity, contempt, and eccentricity against women had penetrated deep into their bone. It was hard to change them, which was the one thing Audrey couldn't tolerate the most. When she thought of the strict, ancient, and extremely conservative environment she would find herself in after becoming a princess consort, Audrey felt that she would surely go crazy and flee, disregarding everything else. So she wasn't moved at all by the rather solicitous flattery of the princes. She was even very repulsed. Edisac Augustus, the last name implies that he's a member of the royal family. I vaguely remember that he's a prince. What dangerous matter is he going to do? I have no way of coming into contact with him, right? I can ask Miss Audrey and Viscount Glaint for help, but I have to think of a reason ahead of time to prevent any suspicion from them. Force frowned slightly as she interpreted Mr. Fool's words. Alger was very interested in the matter, but he didn't dare to ask Mr. Fool, who was obviously just providing a hint. He could only ponder to himself for 2 seconds before saying to Justice, the magician, and the world, "The atmosphere over the sea isn't calm either. It might have a connection with Backland, just like those machines." His words were completely baseless. He simply wanted to exaggerate the degree of the danger, and let the 3 Tarot Club members in Backland investigate it diligently. Have to say that Mr. Hanged Man has acted in concert so well. Klein, who was watching from the sidelines, gave up on the idea of having the world say something similar. He only mentioned Prince Edisac, but not the lady with the sapphire ring, who was suspected of having a Grade 0 sealed artifact. He didn't even mention the possibility that the matter Prince Edisac might be involved in had to do with 008, and in C. Zangwill, because he didn't know the circumstances of the top sealed artifact that could even destroy a country. All he could rely on were minute clues to make guesses that he wasn't completely sure of. He was afraid that if he directly told the key points to Justice and Miss Magician, their investigations would be detected by the target the moment they honed in on the target. This was also why Klein didn't try to find an opportunity to inform the machinery hive. Based on his guesses about sealed artifact 0-08, he suspected that if he left Mince Street and rode a horse carriage to the Lever Cathedral or the Steam Cathedral, he would encounter an unexpected and absolutely unstoppable attack, such as the eruption of a sealed artifact hidden underground or a fatal strike of a high-sequence bayon. Only the screening of the gray fog allowed Klein to not worry about such problems. To a certain extent, he could inform Justice and the magician about this through a more gentle, more roundabout, and more veiled manner. In addition, Klein had other plans. It was to leave Backland by bowing out the stage as a side character among side characters and changing his appearance without anyone noticing. He would then secretly return and contact the machinery hiveman in a manner beyond the Grade 0 sealed artifact senses. Let's hope this will succeed. I hope there's a chance of finding in Si Zhangwo. Yes, the premise is that he is indeed involved in this matter. Wait a minute. While Mr. Azek was after in Si Zhangwo, he had a conflict with MI9. He became secretly wanted, and MI9 has always been considered to be a pro-royal faction in the military. A series of coincidences revolving Prince Edisak is rather similar to the features displayed by sealed artifact 008 in the past. This seems to indirectly confirm in Si Zhangwo's existence. Klein closed his eyes, and the bright boots and pale hand flashed back to him. He leaned back in his chair, his lips curving upward. Ladies and gentlemen, we shall meet next week. In Empress Bureau, the opulent villa of Earl Hall. Audrey stood in front of the full-length mirror, staring blankly at her reflection. There were good news and bad news for her at this tarot gathering. The good news was that she was about to receive one of the psychiatrist's potion's main ingredients. Although she was no longer the ignorant girl who had bought some basic general knowledge from the hanged man for £1,000 and knew the approximate price of a lot of bay-under ingredients, she didn't mind paying a premium for the eyes of a mirror dragon. After Duke Negan's assassination, she gained the desire and motivation to raise her sequence to receive the corresponding combat strength. For this, she didn't want to wait any longer and was willing to pay a price. As long as the ingredients appeared, she would immediately accept the offer as long as the price wasn't too outrageous, in case something unexpected happened. It's like a precious piece of jewelry that many noble ladies have set their eyes on. It's also like the purebred houses with unique bloodlines that men like. The corresponding premium is inevitable and unavoidable. At times, it's not impossible to have the price double or triple. Besides, with Force busying herself in the process of contacting her teacher, she definitely shouldn't be left wasting her time while taking on risks. Yes, she also doesn't know that I'm Justice, Audrey thought indifferently. As for the bad news, it was no doubt related to the matter of Prince Edisak. It left her concerned and worried. Fortunately, Mr. World received the news, and Mr. Fool had provided a warning. Otherwise, who knows how things would have turned out. Audrey, with such excellent conditions, you could certainly solve this problem. Come on. The girl drew the sign of the crimson moon against the reflection in the mirror and tried hard to be optimistic. Then she restrained her emotions and headed out to the piano room, preparing to participate in her scheduled piano lesson as if nothing had happened. This was because Earl Hall and his wife, as well as Hibbert Hall, wouldn't be home until dinner, and she had no one to ask for information now. She could only tell herself to be calm, to be composed, and to be patient. Before the tutor arrived, Audrey casually played the piano, using the beautiful melody to cleanse her mind and soul. When she finished playing, she noticed that Susie had opened the door at some point and was sitting beside her. She still had a pair of gold-rimmed glasses hanging around her neck. Audrey, what problems did you encounter? The sound of your piano tells me that you're frustrated over something, Susie said suddenly. Audrey froze, not knowing how to reply. She suddenly felt that having a mind-reading dog at home wasn't necessarily a good thing, within the campsite that had a lit bonfire. With his eyes closed, Derek Berg thought back quietly to what had happened at the tarot gathering and made sure that he hadn't forgotten the memories of his repeated experiences. After an unknown period of time, he opened his eyes, which were brimming with anticipation, and looked around. However, what entered into his eyes were Flames and his teammates, who were exactly the same as in his memory. At that moment, the cross-legged demon hunter Colin, who was leaning against a stone pillar, said, "We will set off after 50 rounds of lightning." At this moment, Derek was sure that everything that had happened before wasn't a dream or a hallucination. Sherwood Borough, 15 Mint Street. Klein went down to the first floor and sat in the activity room, feeling the warmth of the fireplace. He quietly rocked in the reclining chair without reading the newspapers, magazines, or even books. It was all so peaceful and silent until he heard the ringing of his doorbell. Klein, who was wearing a house shirt and cashmere vest, got up and walked towards the door. The visitor took him by surprise. He opened the door and chuckled. "Good afternoon, Emlyn. Aren't you supposed to be helping at the Harvest Church at this hour?" It was the handsome, somewhat effeminate vampire Emlyn White, whose hair was combed back at an angle. The arrogant man's expression froze when he heard Klein's greeting. It took him a bit of effort to recover his composure. "Do you have something to consult with you, Detective?" "Sherlock Moriarty." Emlyn enunciated one word at a time. After inviting him into the activity room, Klein returned to his reclining chair and asked with a smile, "What is it?" Fee for a consultation is £1, but the consultation cannot exceed an hour. Lynn White didn't pay attention to his words, and he said while deep in thought, "A big shot wants me to do something. Although that matter can help me solve my problem indirectly, it also contains a great amount of risk. You don't have any friends, and I'm afraid my parents will be worried, and you're a very knowledgeable Beyonder detective. What do you suggest? Reject or accept? Solve your problem." Clearing the psychological cue, Klein said thoughtfully, "I can't give you any advice with just the word something." Lynn White fell silent for a few seconds before he clenched his teeth and said in a low voice, "It has something to do with that fool." Huh. Klein almost lifted his hand to his ear. Determination, after a second of confirmation, Klein clasped his hands together and leaned forward. "What exactly is this something?" "No, I can't say any further." Lynn White shook his head firmly. Afraid of being probed, Klein didn't pursue the matter. He simply analyzed the situation, based on the information that the vampire had just revealed. Something to do with the fool, it can help Lynn White resolve his problem, contains a high risk, combined with his previous ideas. This seems to indicate that he intended to hold an appropriate ritual to pray to the fool, which is also me, so as to eliminate the psychological cue and gain his long-awaited freedom. However, this is no longer a ritual that Lynn will be holding himself. It's a result of a particular big shot's instructions, and with this vampire's pride, for him to address the person that way, it most likely means that the person is a powerhouse among the sanguine. Why would a sanguine big shot send a descendant to pray to the fool? Have they started working with the Aurora Order? Confused, Klein looked up at the expectant Lynn and scoffed to himself. "Try guessing if I'll respond to your prayers." He hesitated for 2 seconds and didn't make a suggestion. Instead, he said, "Statistically speaking, when praying to a hidden existence without understanding the situation, 30 out of 100 cases would not receive any response. 68 cases will end up encountering all sorts of terrible things and cause them to lose their lives, or live a life worse than death. Only 2 cases have the possibility of success, allowing them to get what they want, but the price they pay might not be what they want." As a former keyboard warrior, Klein had always believed that when it came to proving something or reinforcing a point of view, anyone who just gave an example, an exception, without mentioning the entire sample and overall statistics was being an asshole. It was merely a trick of concept, and in these cases there were usually similar companion words, such as "I have a friend," "a girl I know," or "someone around me." Therefore, to convince Lynn White, he deliberately fabricated some data. Of course, this wasn't entirely baseless. At least many of the files which Klein had read, while he was a member of a Nighthawks team, had described similar situations. Only 2 cases of success. Problems happened to 68 cases. Startled, Lynn couldn't help but lift his hand to smooth his hair. Basically, that is the level of danger over the matter you're going to do. If you have malicious intentions, the risk is even higher than this, Klein replied sincerely. Lynn shook his head subconsciously. "No, there's no malice. Besides, the big shot will protect me in the process." "No malice?" Even if you have malice, you might not know since Yower just cannon fodder who has been pushed to the front lines." Klein raised his right palm and strengthened his tone with a gesture. "This will reduce the risk by a lot, but it definitely won't reduce it to 0. Does that big shot really have the means to resist a hidden existence?" "Probably not," Lynn answered haltingly. "So?" Klein spread his hands. He suddenly revealed a smile and said, "Lynn, there is no need for you to take this risk. Even if you completely believe in Earth Mother, it will not affect your life in any way. Look at the citizens of Fainapotter. Don't they eat, dress, and do whatever they want? When the time comes, there's a high chance that Father Atravsky will no longer force you to do volunteer work at the Harvest Church. You will regain your original freedom. Furthermore, I believe that you have adapted well to the teachings of Earth Mother without any contradiction." Lynn White remained silent for a while and said, "Being a believer because I like her beliefs is completely different from being forcefully turned into a believer through a psychological cue. Even if I do abandon the moon one day and believe in Earth Mother, I also hope that it is a choice that I freely make. It has nothing to do with others. This is the last pride of a sanguine." Klein looked at Lynn with some surprise. He hadn't expected him to be so insistent. He considered for 2 seconds and didn't try to persuade him again by giving a terse acknowledgement. "The problem is actually very simple. That is, do you have the courage to face a certain degree of danger because of the orders of the big shot and the temptation to get rid of the queue? If you're willing to sacrifice your life for this, then the answer is extremely simple. In short, this matter will ultimately be left to you to decide. Emlyn listened with a heavy expression, and he instinctively retorted, TF, I really choose to make the attempt. It's definitely not for myself, but for all sanguine. Resolving this problem is just an additional perk. For all sanguine. What matter of mine involves all sanguine? That big shot was lying to you, right? Klein sneered. You believe that a weak vampire has the chance to save an entire race. Sanguine, sanguine. Emlyn emphasized. Moreover, my strength isn't bad either. It's equivalent to sequence 7 of you human. By the way, it's the kind that specializes in combat. As for whether you believe it or not, you wouldn't understand. He stood up and said, although your analysis and suggestions are meaningless, I still have to thank you. The consultation fee will be deducted from the previous suitcase and tin box. Huh? Klein wasn't able to react for a moment to what he was talking about. It was only when Emlyn had left that he suddenly realized what he meant. The vessels in large transactions usually free. That petty and stingy vampire. In the darkness, in which the frequency of lightning had yet to resume, the exploratory team from the City of Silver, punctually, arrived at the periphery of the abandoned temple. Derek remembered that during their first operation, all the animal hide lanterns had been extinguished here. The entire team fell into pure darkness, and he had also heard the creepy cry for help coming from the depths of the temple. According to the conjectures from Mr. Hanged Man and Miss Justice, this might be the starting point for our repeated cycle. But why would we wake up in the campsite outside the city and not directly here? Remembering the discussion at the tarot meeting, Derek raised his arm and prayed secretly, as suggested. A pure light suddenly burst out from his body, causing Joshua and the other members of the exploratory team to quickly assume battle position. What happened? Demon Hunter Colin drew his sword and asked in a deep voice. Derek looked left and right in horror and said, Your Excellency, I just heard a child crying, save me, save me. He wanted to test if this was a key point. And now? Colin asked warily. Don't hear it anymore. Derek listened carefully. Demon Hunter Colin glanced at Joshua and the others from the corner of his eye. Did any of you hear it? No. The exploratory team members shook their heads. After pondering for a few seconds, Colin came to a decision. He took out a dark blue metal bottle from the secret compartment in his belt and smeared the colorless, viscous liquid on his sword. Then he stabbed upwards with his sword. Suddenly, the sky lit up. Streaks of silver, snake-like beams started to surge upwards, quickly spreading in all directions. The silver-white light instantly enveloped all the members of the exploratory team, as if illuminating the darkest corner of every single one of them. With a sizzling sound, the silver serpents drilled into the void, heading off into the unknown. Everything calmed down very quickly, leaving only the dim light of the animal hide lantern scattered in silence. Colin narrowed his eyes. Whatever he attempted had sensed something unknown. After a full 5 seconds, he raised his hand and pointed forward. From now on, we can't afford to be careless. We have to be on full alert. Such familiar words, this isn't the key to breaking out of this predicament. Derek calmed his heart and followed the team into the half-deserted temple without any delay. This time, he learned his lesson and didn't look at the face of the fallen creator. In the process of inspecting the ground, he managed to get himself to investigate the area where the mural was by being proactive. He held onto the animal hide lantern and the axe of Hurricane in his hands as he and one of his teammates began to take action as a small team. He finally reached his destination after passing through a series of mottled and crumbling walls. As the light from the animal hide lantern grew closer, the mural on the wall gradually became clearer. Derek first looked towards the corner and found the strange, memorable line of words. Rose Redemption. He silently chanted the name, raised the animal hide lantern, and carefully examined the details of the mural. On the highest area of the mottled wall was a huge, blurry, pitch-black cross. A shadow that was difficult to discern was hanging upside down on it. Against such a backdrop, there was a desolate plain. In the plains, there was a long line of people. Their destination was a distant mountain, the cross on top of the mountain, and the figure hanging upside down. Within the line, some of the people were kneeling on the ground, praying devoutly. Others had already stood up and were walking forward while facing a raging wind. Their faces were simple sketches, as though it was trying to highlight their tattered clothing. Only the leader at the front was relatively clearer. It was a tall and thin man, with long, silver hair reaching his back. This man had soft facial features, his head was lowered, and his eyes were tightly shut. There were layers upon layers of wings of light on his back. Angel, a legendary angel. Derek observed the situation around the leader with excitement. Soon, he discovered a meandering, rippling river beneath the feet of the seemingly angelic man. The river kept twisting and turning, and it led back into itself, becoming the source. A cycle. This creates a cycle. Derek felt that he had caught on to something important. In the cycles of experiences, there was actually a circular river in the mural on the wall. The latter was obviously hinting or revealing something. Derek looked up and saw the silver-haired angel with an uncountable number of wings. There was a touch of indifference in the gentleness of his face, as though he was looking down at a river, looking down at fate. Is this the true meaning behind Mr. Fool's hint? Derek thought for a moment and decided to give it a try. If he succeeded, he planned on blaming all his anomalies on the boy, Jack. If he failed, no one would remember what he had done. Under the stunned gaze of his teammates, Derek raised the axe of hurricane and viciously slashed at the river in the mural. The lightning that had just flashed by was triggered, and the silver light fell onto the axe. Bam! Derek's axe, wrapped in streaks of silver, struck the river in the mural, causing the wall to cave in and stone chips to fly everywhere. With one strike, the river that had its source connected to its mouth completely disintegrated. Just as he was looking forward to having the cycle broken, resulting in the members of the exploratory team escaping the temple, Demon Hunter Colin's figure phased away and appeared before him, his face grim. What were you doing? The tip of the demigod's sword was still pointed downwards, but the grip on his hilt was clearly tighter than before. Thinking back to the collective wisdom of the Tarot Club members, Derek said, half doubtfully and half fearfully, "Your Excellency, a black shadow flashed past here just now." It's true. It looked like the figure of a child. Without looking away, Colin Iliad asked another team member, "Haim, did you see it?" The exploratory team member named Haim subconsciously moved closer to the chief, firmly shook his head and said, "No, I didn't see anything." Colin's light blue eyes immediately glowed, revealing two complex dark green symbols. He watched Derek in this state for 4 to 5 seconds. Finally, he withdrew his gaze and said in a normal tone, "This is your first exploration mission. Hallucinations due to being nervous is normal. Subsequently, you are to stay by my side. I think you'll be calmer this way." "Yes, Your Excellency," Derek agreed without any hesitation. Having just made an attempt, he confirmed that the mural wasn't critical. The rose redemption that Mr. Fool suggested likely hides a deeper meaning. It's not that simple. Derek walked silently beside Chief Colin with the axe of hurricane in hand. What happened afterward wasn't much different from the explorations he remembered from his previous exploration. Everyone repeated the events in the past and arrived at the final hall with an altar for the 6th time. There they found the yellow-haired boy, Jack, curled up in the shadows. Upon hearing "Save me, save me," and seeing the silhouette of the child, Demon Hunter Colin nodded his head indiscernibly and retracted most of the attention he had placed on Derek Berg. Just as he was deliberating his words, Derek suddenly asked, "How can we save you?" Jack revealed an excited expression. Save me, send me home." "Send me home? Where is your home?" Derek asked, curious and frightened. Seeing this, Colin shut his mouth and tightened his grip. Jack raised his hand weakly and said, my home is at Enmet Harbor." Enmet Harbor, although Mr. Hanged Man never mentioned it, from the word harbor, Jack really doesn't belong to this place of ours. It's very likely that he comes from the outside world, from the Lone Kingdom where Miss Justice and the others are located. Derek was overjoyed, unable to hide his excitement. His reaction didn't arouse any suspicion from Demon Hunter Colin, because this powerful chief of the 6-member council had also never seen the sea. He could only read from the preserved books that this body of water was many times larger than a lake, as well as the term harbor. The words that came out of the strange boy's mouth presented itself like a painting of a new world in front of Colin. This made him, who was desperately searching for the future of the City of Silver, forget about anything else as he blurted out, "How did you, or you and your companions, get here?" Jack showed a reminiscing expression. My father and I first traveled by boat, then we met up with his companions and continued on the voyage. After a huge storm, the rest of us touched ground and followed the direction of the Lord's gaze and came all the way here. Followed the direction of the Lord's gaze. Demon Hunter Colin and the others looked at the deity statue in unison, trying to determine where he was staring at. Soon, Colin was able to determine some general information. They had proceeded in the direction of where the statue was looking at. That is to say, as soon as we reverse the process, we can find the shore and the place where they landed. The opposite direction of his gaze is the map around the city of Silver, which was gradually being perfected through continuous explorations, appeared in Colin's mind, allowing him to come up with a preliminary sketch of the route of the boy's journey. If there are no other temples in the middle and no corresponding statues, extrapolating it all the way would pass through the ruins of the giant king's court. Colin's pupils suddenly contracted. That was the palace that once housed the ancient god, giant King Ormir. It wasn't too far away from the city of Silver. The descendants of the kingdom of Silver, who had been ruled by the giants for generations, knew exactly where the ruins were located, but they were still unable to complete their exploration of the area because it was extremely dangerous, even more dangerous than the pure darkness. According to Colin's extrapolations, the unfamiliar boy and his party had passed through the ruins of the giant king's court before arriving here. How did they do it? Perhaps they didn't take a completely direct path, and they circled around the giant king's court. Regardless, there's a path that leads to the sea behind the giant king's court. And on the other end of the sea might be a human kingdom. Is that the hope of the city of Silver? Colin couldn't help resisting the thought. At this moment, Derek acutely noticed that the clothes on the boy's chest and abdomen were dyed dark red, as though some kind of liquid was slowly seeping out. "Are you hurt?" he cautiously asked. Jack lowered his head and replied in an erratic tone, "Something ugly is growing there." As he spoke, he took off his clothes, revealing his bare chest. It was inlaid with 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth. It wasn't painted, nor was it made of gems. They were real eyes, a real nose, and a real mouth in the purest sense of the word. Furthermore, they didn't seem to belong to one particular face, but that of 3 people. All of a sudden, Derek imagined a scene in which Jack had used the remnants of his companions after eating them, their eyes, nose, and mouth, to form a strange face on his chest. The face was gentle and indifferent, giving Derek an inexplicable feeling of familiarity. It took only a second or two for Derek to figure out the reason for the familiarity. The face was very much like the angel in the mural above them, the silver-haired angel with his feet over the circular river. Sure enough, the reason we keep repeating the exploration is because of him. A thought struck Derek, and he blurted out a single word, as though he was going to blurt the incantation to extricate himself from the predicament. "Rose Redemption," he solemnly shouted. Jack raised his head and stared at him, his mouth slowly grinning wide before reaching his ear. "Team so hungry, so hungry." Derek froze as he saw a fierce battle ensue. When he regained consciousness, he found himself sitting by the bonfire in the campsite again. Rose Redemption isn't the incantation. He began to reflect deeply. The 7th exploration soon began. Derek, who had made an attempt, no longer behaved strangely, but he proactively sought to investigate the Rose Redemption mural. As usual, the exploratory team entered the underground hall with the altar and the deity statue. They found the obviously strange little boy, Jack. After a similar conversation, Derek once again saw the human face that had been pieced together with the facial features of other people. Now experienced, he didn't take any actions which could agitate the boy. He lowered his voice and said to Demon Hunter Colin, "Your Excellency, the face on his chest is very similar to the angel in the mural above us. It's the angel with silver hair, whose feet are above a river that is connected from mouth to source. Yes, the mural which is labeled Rose Redemption at the corner." Colin was taken aback at first before he frowned. As he paid attention and consoled Jack, he sized up Derek from the corner of his eye. After a few seconds of silence, he said with a suppressed voice, "Due to you mentioning this matter, you made me think of certain things." Without waiting for Derek to ask, he continued, "We've been studying this mural for a very long period of time, and only believe that it depicts an angel leading a group of ascetics on a pilgrimage. And perhaps this group's name is Rose Redemption. The river that runs from source to mouth represents a cycle, and our interpretation of it is that this pilgrimage takes place over and over again. And now it may be that it is used to identify the angel. That's the idea you gave me, as Ammon used to hide in your body. Why? Derek was at a loss. Demon Hunter Colin stared at Jack and said, the worm left behind by Ammon had the symbol of time, and a circular river is often related to fate. Putting the two together, it reminded me of a few books that mention something that I'm unsure of their credibility. When the Lord that created everything, the omnipotent and omniscient God, cast his attention on this world, he had many angels around him. Among them were leaders of the angels, kings of angels that were closest to being a god. There were a total of 8 of them, and some of their names have already been lost to history. There are still records of others, perhaps simple or detailed. Legend has it that the sons of God were among these 8 kings of angels. Among them, 2 kings of angels had the titles Angel of Time and Angel of Fate. Derek was immediately enlightened as he asked for confirmation. You believe that Ammon is the Angel of Time, and that the mural is depicting the Angel of Fate? T can't be sure for now. Only the title Angel of Time has been passed down. As for the Angel of Fate, the records are relatively detailed. Colin suddenly took a deep breath. Immediately he solemnly said, Angel of Fate, Tail Devourer or Robber Rose. In the evening, within the Odora family's underground structure, Emlyn White looked at the iron-black coffin and said to the ancient sanguine inside, Lord Nibs, I accept the ancestors' mission. Nibs replied in his aged voice, very good. When do you want to begin? Do you have any wishes that remain unfulfilled? T4. Upon hearing Lord Nibs asking about his last wishes, Emlyn White's calves went limp, and he almost regretted it. He stiffened his neck and said, there's no need. We can begin now. Response: the iron-black coffin with its strange patterns lay quietly in the center, and there seemed to be hidden shockwaves in the air that seemed to be silently colliding. Emlyn White stood in the corner and lit the candles according to the normal ritual procedures, burning the essential oils and corresponding herbal powders. A dense and unsteady atmosphere emanated, and after recalling the requirements of artificial sleepwalking, Emlyn lowered his head, began to enter cogitation, and repeated the honorific name of the fool. The fool that doesn't belong to this era. The mysterious ruler above the gray fog. The king of yellow and black who wields good luck. Amidst his monotone voice, Emlyn gradually entered a magical state. His body felt relaxed and reserved. It felt like he was in deep sleep, but his spirituality was light and energetic as it constantly spread outwards. At this moment, he had a feeling that he was continuously drifting upwards. In the ancient palace above the gray fog, Klein was sitting at the end of the long bronze table, tapping his fingers on the rippling light screen to his side. He was expressionlessly watching the praying figure in amusement. Although it was vague, Klein could tell at a glance that it was vampire Emlyn White. Very courageous, having the drive akin to buying a doll, Klein sighed and didn't respond. He had previously tried to divine the purpose of the sanguines, but he was unable to obtain any effective revelation. The only thing he was sure of was that it had nothing to do with the Aurora Order. This piqued Klein's curiosity, but he wouldn't take the risk of responding to Emlyn White when a lofty sanguine was beside Emlyn. He didn't know if he could grasp traces of the mysterious space above the gray fog and threaten it like blasphemer Ammon. He had no intention to confirm it, since he was dealing with an avatar of Ammon back then. Yet he was now facing a powerful sanguine's true body. There's no need to take risks on matters of no importance, even if I want to know the real purpose of the sanguines, and it's not like there's no other way. Klein looked at Emlyn White in his state of artificial sleepwalking. He said to himself with a smile, I can delay my response. He planned to wait until tomorrow or the day after. He would suddenly respond when Emlyn White was without protection and when the sanguine had given up. However, there was a premise, which was to first use divination to confirm the degree of danger. Tail Devourer, just like that river. Derek Berg suddenly thought of something. Demon Hunter Collins solemnly nodded. Yes. TT means that we may have stepped into a river that runs from its mouth to source, preventing our departure. Fortunately, this should only be remnants of that Angel of Fate's power. He isn't hiding here. No, it's definitely certain, and it has long since been the case, Derek silently said to himself. At this moment, Colin took out a dark red metal tube. He unscrewed the cap and gulped it down. His light blue eyes quickly turned lighter, tinged with silver. In the end, his pupils seemed to turn vertical, reflecting Jack's figure. A few sparks of silver light lit up in his eye. They circled or collided at random, in an extremely intense manner. Ding! Demon Hunter Colin first stabbed his sword into the ground, and with a flip of his hand, he pulled out his other sword, smearing it with golden, sun-like oil. Noticing this action, Jack's expression immediately changed, as if he was shrouded in a thick shadow. Before he could open his mouth, Demon Hunter Colin moved. He pulled out his sword from the ground, leaving behind a blurry figure. The golden and silver light shone brightly, illuminating the entire underground hall. The light before the little boy was the most intense. After a mournful scream, the darkness once again shrouded the altar. Jack stood in his original spot, without taking even a step. However, the face on his chest had disappeared, leaving behind only a hole where his pulsating internal organs could be seen. A few meters to Jack's side, Demon Hunter Colin genuflected, his two swords hanging down at an angle. In front of him, the face was torn apart, reduced to scattered eyes, a nose, and a mouth. These organs spasmed and bounced like electric shocks, and soon they were still, rotting rapidly like they were supposed to. In an instant, Derek felt an invisible, aqueous barrier around him silently shatter. Almost at the same time, he seemed to have left the swift river and returned to the bank. Looking at the gloomy underground hall and the upside-down deity statue, and at Jack, who had a distorted expression and had fainted due to the pain, Derek felt a sense of joy and relief. He knew that he and the others had finally escaped the cycle of repeating their lives. Derek was well aware that, although the final solution didn't seem complicated, it might have taken dozens or hundreds of repeated attempts to find the clues and solution, without knowing any clues or the problem beforehand. In the process, the slightest carelessness could lead to death, and Derek had no way of knowing if a life that was lost could experience a redo, or if they would still revive by the bonfire but would end up dead after escaping this predicament. What's even more serious is that people would always repeat the same choice, which was to say that they wouldn't be able to discover the problem in the first place. Without the corresponding memories and experience, they wouldn't detect any abnormalities even if it was the 1,000th time, and they would completely lose themselves in the circular river until they reached the end of their lives due to the normal flow of time in the outside world. At the thought of such a possibility, Derek thanked Mr. Fool wholeheartedly for restoring his memory and giving him a hint. Turning his head to the side, he saw that Joshua and the other members of the exploratory team didn't show any abnormal reactions as they checked the surrounding area in a way that was similar to the sixth exploration. Perhaps it will only be after returning to the City of Silver that they would realize that they've lost a part of their lives from the difference in dates. Derek thought silently. At this moment, Demon Hunter Colin stood up, walked back to the boy's side, and took out another small metal bottle. He then poured the thick black liquid inside onto the boy's empty chest. The liquid quickly condensed into a translucent membrane, sticking to the wound and stopping the flow of blood. "Haim, Joshua, the both of you are in charge of him." Colin suppressed his throbbing hand and ordered in a low voice. To him, this was the City of Silver's hope for ridding the curse and defeating the prophecy of the apocalypse. Derek wanted to covertly thank the fool, but he realized that there was no corresponding prayer gesture. In Empress Borough, the opulent villa of Earl Hall, the sumptuous dinner glistened under the light of the candles in an alluring manner. Unlike what was imagined in the newspapers and magazines, the dinner for a great aristocratic family wasn't serious, and there was no need for silence. This was a rare occasion for family members to gather together. While eating, they would casually chat about a variety of relaxed topics in order to communicate and solidify their relationship. Audrey sliced a piece of steak which was produced from her ranch, observed Earl Hall's expression, and without hiding her curiosity, she asked, "Father, did something happen to Prince Edisac recently?" If nothing had happened, then her plan was to pretend that she had heard irresponsible rumors that didn't correspond to reality. It wasn't uncommon for this to happen among the aristocracy. Earl Hall paused, raised his eyebrows, and asked, "What did you hear?" "There really is something." Gleaning information from her father's reaction, Audrey replied with a faint smile, "Some rumors, but they seem to be true." Earl Hall rubbed his temples and said, "It's not a very serious matter. Audrey, I know what you're thinking, so I don't have to hide it from you. This involves a relatively ordinary scandal of the royal family. To put it simply, Prince Edisac has fallen in love with a commoner girl. This led to the death of an aristocratic descendant. The royal family has blocked the spread of this matter, not wanting to cause too much of a commotion." His wife took a sip of champagne and said, "It seems he isn't mature enough." Mother is being very tactful with her criticism. It does sound suspicious. Has Prince Edisac really gotten himself involved in a dangerous situation that would bring about terrible changes to Backland? Audrey put on a look of sudden understanding and said with a smile, "This makes me wonder, why would the story of freedom and love involve the death of an aristocratic descendant?" Hibbert Hall kept his head lowered while slicing the tender steak and guessed with great interest. "It reminds me of the complicated love stories that are so common among the believers of the Lord of Storm. It's very common to fight for honor and for a lady. TT's a tradition that has been placed into a museum." Earl Hall denied his eldest son's statement. Audrey seized the opportunity and thoughtfully said, "I don't think Prince Edisac is that kind of person, and rumors have already proliferated. Maybe that's not what they really want to cover up." "Perhaps not." Earl Hall ruminated over these words, unconsciously frowning. Knowing when to stop, Audrey didn't say anything else, and she naturally led the conversation in a different direction. She planned on probing her other noble friends about the matter. As a girl that Prince Edisac had once courted, it was absolutely normal for her to want to know the details of the matter. Whether it was curiosity or indignation, they were enough to motivate people to make such an attempt. Being unable to maintain a state of artificial sleepwalking for long, Emlyn White returned to reality in exhaustion. Opening his eyes, he stared at the iron-black coffin. Then he said with a mixture of relief and disappointment, "Lord Nibs, there's no response." After a long moment of silence, Nibs finally said in a rather hoarse voice, "Okay. Stay here tonight to prevent any accidents from happening." "All right." Emlyn didn't try to insist otherwise. He spent the night in worry and trepidation, but the night was so serene and unremarkable. It silently faded only when Backland's rare winter sunshine scattered across the window. "What bad weather!" Emlyn left Odora's villa, lowered his hat, and mumbled while he got onto a rental carriage. His destination was the Harvest Church south of the bridge. After the carriage continued steadily for some time, Emlyn's vision suddenly blurred, and he saw an endless gray fog. Then, to his amazement, he found himself in a mysterious and majestic palace, sitting at a long, mottled bronze table. At the very end of the long table, there was a figure shrouded in a thick gray fog, looking down at him from above.